Welcome! Today we're diving into a gripping werewolf shifter romance full of mystery, love, and prophecy. This full-length audiobook will take you on an unforgettable journey through magic and destiny. If you're into paranormal romance, you're in the right place. The night sky was cloaked in darkness, broken only by the blood-red glow of a rare lunar eclipse. Isla Blackthorn kept her head down as she moved through the thick underbrush, her senses heightened by the weight of the magic in the air. Her heart thrummed in her chest, matching the pulse of power that seemed to resonate from the moon itself. Her every instinct told her to return home, to the safety of the village. But something deeper, something she couldn't name, pulled her forward. For as long as she could remember, Isla had hidden her magic. In the remote mountain village where she had been raised, witches were tolerated, but barely. Their power, both feared and coveted, was a dangerous thing to reveal. Isla had spent her life keeping a low profile, casting small charms in secret, and never drawing attention to herself. It was safer that way. But tonight, the magic felt different, heavier, as though the world was holding its breath. A rustling in the forest ahead brought Isla to a halt. Her hand flew to the pendant at her throat, her mother's grimoire tucked safely under her cloak. The sound of something, or someone, moving through the forest grew louder, more frantic. She crouched low, her breath catching in her throat as she scanned the trees. Then she saw it, a massive wolf, dark fur gleaming in the moonlight, staggered into the clearing ahead of her. Its body was battered and bloody, as though it had been fighting for its life. But what struck Isla most were the wolf's eyes, burning with intelligence and pain, locked onto her with a gaze that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't just a wolf. The stories had always been whispered, tales of an alpha, cursed by the moon goddess herself, trapped in his wolf form for nearly a decade. Asher. The name alone sent shivers through the village whenever it was spoken. They said he was mad, driven to the brink by years of isolation, his once great pack fractured in his absence. No one had seen him since the curse took hold. But here he was. Isla's instinct was to run, to flee back to the safety of the village, but something rooted her in place. She took a cautious step forward, her heart hammering in her chest. The wolf, Asher, growled low in his throat, but made no move to attack. His eyes never left hers, and for a moment, Isla felt the pull of his gaze as if it were a physical thing, drawing her closer despite her fear. She knelt beside him, her fingers hovering over his blood-matted fur. Her magic stirred beneath her skin, a warning and a promise all at once. She could feel it, the curse wrapped around him, ancient and dark, bound by forces far beyond her understanding. It was unlike anything she had ever encountered before. "You're cursed," she whispered, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. Asher's growl softened, as though acknowledging her words, but there was no relief in his eyes. Only desperation. Isla hesitated. She wasn't a healer, nor was she trained in breaking curses, especially not one tied to the moon goddess herself. But as her hand brushed his fur, something passed between them, a jolt of energy, a connection that went beyond the physical. Her magic responded to his, and for the first time, she saw more than the wolf before her. She saw the man beneath the curse, trapped, waiting. Asher let out a ragged breath, his eyes briefly closing as if surrendering to her presence. It was clear he believed she could help him. But what could she do? The power of the moon goddess was ancient, far older than any spell in her family's grimoire. Isla pulled her hand back, trembling with the weight of the realization that was settling over her. I don't know if I can break it," she said, her voice barely audible. The curse was strong, woven into the very fabric of his soul. If she tried to undo it without fully understanding its nature, The consequences could be catastrophic. Dark forces long sealed away could be unleashed, and the world could fall into chaos. Asher shifted, his body trembling with effort, and in his eyes, Isla saw the flicker of something beyond pain. Hope. It was a fragile, desperate hope, but it was there. He believed she was the key. But why her? Isla stood, her heart heavy with the knowledge she had spent her entire life avoiding. She had always known she was different, even among witches. Her magic was more attuned to the cycles of the moon, more powerful during eclipses and full moons. But it wasn't just her magic. The pendant she wore, passed down through generations, was not just a family heirloom. It was a mark, a symbol of something far greater than herself. The truth dawned on her with chilling clarity. She had been marked by the moon goddess since birth. She wasn't here by accident. Her meeting with Asher wasn't a coincidence. Their fates had been intertwined long before she had ever set foot in these woods. The curse on Asher wasn't just about him, it was about her, too. The weight of her destiny settled on her shoulders like a shroud. She had never wanted this, never wanted to be part of some ancient prophecy, chosen for a role she had no control over. But now, standing in the shadow of the cursed Alpha, she had no choice but to face it. "I can help you," Isla whispered, her voice steadier now. "But there's a risk. If I try to break the curse without understanding its full power, we could unleash something worse." Asher's gaze locked onto hers, and in that moment, there was an understanding between them, a silent agreement. He had nothing left to lose, and Isla had been chosen for this, whether she wanted it or not. Taking a deep breath, she knelt beside him once more, her fingers brushing the pendant at her throat. The moon above glowed brighter, its red light casting eerie shadows across the clearing. She could feel the power thrumming in the air, waiting for her to act. She had to choose. With a final glance at Asher, Isla closed her eyes and let her magic flow. The world around her faded as she focused on the curse, feeling its dark tendrils wrap around Asher's soul. It pushed back, resisting her touch, but she pressed on, her power intertwining with the ancient magic that bound him. The air crackled with energy as she reached deeper, searching for the heart of the spell. Asher let out a low growl, his body trembling beneath her hands. Isla's magic surged forward, battling the darkness that had claimed him. But as she pushed further, she felt something stir, something older, darker, lurking beneath the surface. It was the moon goddess herself, her presence undeniable, her power absolute, and she was watching. Isla's heart pounded as the realization hit her. This wasn't just a curse. This was a test of her strength, her will, her very soul. The moon goddess had chosen her, marked her for a purpose that went beyond anything she had ever imagined. The question now was whether she had the strength to face it. Isla stood at the edge of the forest, her hands trembling with the weight of the magic that had just surged through her. Asher, now in his human form, lay at her feet, unconscious but free from the wolf that had trapped him for nearly a decade. The curse wasn't broken, not yet, but she had bought them time. Time to understand the ancient magic that bound him and the dark forces that waited for their misstep. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a red hue over the trees, as if foreshadowing the bloodshed to come. Isla glanced down at Asher, his chest rising and falling steadily, his face etched with exhaustion and pain. She could feel the pull between them, a tether of fate that bound their destinies together, whether she wanted it or not. Her fingers curled around the pendant at her throat, the mark of the moon goddess, a reminder of the power she had barely begun to understand. The deeper they went into uncovering the curse, the more Isla realized how intertwined their lives were. This wasn't just about freeing Asher from the spell. It was about her own destiny, too. The prophecy she had read in her mother's grimoire echoed in her mind. a warning she couldn't ignore. But before Isla could contemplate the weight of that prophecy further, the distant howl of wolves shattered the silence. Her heart raced as she turned toward the sound, recognizing the threat that loomed beyond the trees. The Black Claw Pack. Asher stirred beside her, his eyes fluttering open, dark and sharp, the wildness still clinging to him. "They're coming," he rasped, his voice rough from years of silence. His gaze locked with hers, and for a moment, the vulnerability of his human form seemed to fade, replaced by the fierce determination of the alpha he once was. "Ronan won't stop until he takes everything." Isla swallowed, the tension between them thick in the cool night air. "Why? What does he want with you?" Asher pushed himself to sit, wincing as he tried to move. "My bloodline." He looked at her, something ancient and haunted in his eyes. "The Red Moon Pack carries the blood of the first wolves blessed by the moon goddess. Ronan believes that if he destroys me, he'll take that power for himself. He's been after it for generations." The weight of Asher's words settled over her, the pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. It wasn't just about the curse. There was more at stake than she had realized. Ronan, the ambitious and ruthless alpha of the Black Claw Pack, wasn't just hunting Asher for revenge. He wanted dominance, power, and Asher's bloodline was the key to securing it. Before Isla could respond, another howl pierced the air, closer this time. Asher's face hardened, his muscles tensing as he struggled to stand. "We need to move." Isla reached out to help him, her touch hesitant but firm. Asher flinched slightly, unused to the gentleness, but he didn't pull away. Together, they moved deeper into the forest, away from the approaching threat, though Isla knew it was only a matter of time before Ronan found them. The Red Moon Territory. Days later. The tension in the air was palpable as Isla and Asher approached the Red Moon Pack's territory. The towering pines that surrounded the valley were as familiar to Asher as his own heartbeat, but now they felt like a prison closing in around him. His return had stirred more than just old memories. It had awakened enemies both inside and outside his pack. Lucien, Asher's younger brother, stood waiting at the entrance to the pack's stronghold, his expression unreadable. Isla could feel the power radiating off him, sharp and controlled, a stark contrast to the wild energy that clung to Asher. "You shouldn't have come back," Lucien said, his voice cold and distant. His eyes flicked to Isla, assessing her with thinly veiled disdain. "And you've brought a witch with you. How fitting." Asher straightened, his body still weakened from the curse, but his spirit unbroken. "This is my pack, Lucien. You don't get to decide who stays and who leaves." Lucien's lips curled into a smirk. "That's where you're wrong, brother. I've been in charge for years now, and things have changed. The pack doesn't need you anymore." Isla felt the tension spike between the two brothers, a dangerous current of rivalry and resentment that had been brewing long before Asher's disappearance. She stepped forward, trying to break the standoff. "We're here because Asher's curse is tied to something much larger. There's more at stake than just pack politics." Lucien's eyes flickered with interest at her words, but the suspicion in his gaze remained. "More at stake? Like what?" Before Isla could answer, Asher cut in. "Ronan, he's coming. He's not just after me. He wants the entire pack, and he'll stop at nothing to get it." Lucien's smirk faded, replaced by a calculating look. "Ronan's been after us for years. Nothing new there." Isla shook her head. "It's different this time. The curse on Asher, the magic tied to his bloodline, it's part of something much darker. If Ronan gets his hands on Asher, it won't just be about power anymore. He'll unleash forces that could destroy all of us." Lucien's expression hardened, the weight of her words sinking in. For a moment, The silence between them was suffocating. Then, without another word, he turned and walked into the pack's stronghold, leaving Asher and Isla standing at the threshold of a war that was far from over. Asher's quarters. Nightfall. Later that night, Isla stood at the window of Asher's old quarters, staring out into the forest that stretched beyond the pack's territory. The moon hung high in the sky, casting silver light across the trees, and with it came the same unsettling feeling she had felt the night she found Asher in the woods. He stood behind her, silent and brooding, his presence as heavy as the magic that lingered between them. The tension that had been building since they arrived at the Red Moon Pack's territory was suffocating, and Isla could feel it pressing in on her, making it hard to breathe. "You didn't have to come," Asher said quietly, his voice rough but sincere. Isla turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "Yes, I did. We're in this together now." Asher's gaze softened, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes for the briefest moment. "I don't want you caught in this. It's not just Ronan, my brother. He won't stop until he takes what he thinks is his." Isla stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "You're not alone, Asher. Whatever happens, we face it together." For the first time, Asher's hand brushed against hers, the brief contact sending a jolt of electricity through her. There was so much unspoken between them: fear, hope, and something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. But in that moment, as the moon watched over them, they were bound by something far stronger than destiny. They were bound by choice. And the battle for the Red Moon Pack was just beginning. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as Isla sat cross-legged on the floor of her small cottage, the grimoire open in front of her. The worn pages were filled with ancient spells, their meanings obscured by cryptic symbols, but it was the prophecy written in her mother's delicate handwriting that had captured her attention. She read the words again, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and awe. A witch and a wolf bound by fate, destined to unite the realms or bring about their destruction. The choice lies not in their hearts, but in the stars that govern them. The weight of the words pressed down on her. She glanced over at Asher, who stood by the window, his gaze distant as he stared out into the dark forest. The moonlight illuminated the sharp lines of his face, casting shadows beneath his eyes. He had been restless since they arrived at the cottage, the tension between the packs weighing heavily on him. But now, with the discovery of the prophecy, their journey had taken a far darker turn. Asher turned, his eyes locking with hers. "What does it mean, Isla?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the grimoire. "It means we're part of something bigger than just breaking your curse," she said softly. "The prophecy, it speaks of a witch and a wolf who are meant to either unite the supernatural world or tear it apart. I think it's about us." Asher's brow furrowed, his muscles tensing as he crossed the room to sit beside her. "And what does that mean for us? For the packs?" Isla took a deep breath, her mind racing with the possibilities. "There are challenges we have to face, magical trials that will prove whether we're worthy of the moon goddess's blessing. If we fail..." She swallowed hard, the gravity of the situation settling in her chest. "If we fail, it could lead to war. Not just between witches and werewolves, but among all supernatural creatures." Asher was silent for a moment, the firelight flickering across his face. Then, his hand found hers, rough and warm. "We'll face whatever comes together." His words were simple, but they steadied her. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be part of some ancient prophecy, but Asher's strength gave her the courage she needed. She nodded, squeezing his hand in return. The Forest of Trials. Days later. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and magic. Isla and Asher stood at the edge of the ancient forest, its towering trees shrouded in mist. The Forest of Trials was known only in legend, a place where magic ruled and the line between the living and the dead blurred. It was here that they would face their first challenge. As they stepped into the forest, the air around them thickened with power. The trees seemed to pulse with energy, their branches twisting and shifting as if alive. Isla's magic hummed beneath her skin, reacting to the wild magic of the forest. She glanced at Asher, who moved with the grace of a predator, his senses heightened by the danger lurking around them. "We have to stay together," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The trials will try to separate us." Asher nodded, his hand brushing against hers briefly before they continued deeper into the forest. The path ahead was unclear, but Isla could feel the magic pulling them forward, guiding them toward their first test. They didn't have to wait long. The ground beneath them rumbled, and from the shadows emerged figures draped in tattered robes, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. The undead. Their gaunt faces twisted in hunger as they staggered toward Isla and Asher, their skeletal hands reaching out. Isla raised her hands, summoning her magic. The air around her crackled as she unleashed a wave of energy, pushing the undead back. But for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. "Asher!" she called out, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining the spell. He was already moving, shifting into his wolf form with a fluid grace that took her breath away. His massive form collided with the undead, tearing through them with savage precision. But even he couldn't keep up with the endless wave of enemies. Isla's heart raced as she realized the truth. "It's not a fight we can win," she murmured to herself. This was the first trial, a test of their ability to work together, not to overpower the forest's magic, but to understand it. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her magic to the forest itself. She felt its ancient power, wild and untamed, and whispered a single word of invocation. The ground beneath them shifted, and the undead dissolved into the earth, their forms melting away as if they had never existed. Asher shifted back into his human form, breathing heavily as he approached her. "What did you do?" "I listened," Isla said quietly, her eyes still closed as she felt the magic of the forest settle. "The trials are designed to test us, not destroy us. We have to use our magic, our connection, to pass them." Asher nodded, though Isla could see the weariness in his eyes. They had survived the first trial, but there were many more to come, and each one would be more dangerous than the last. The Moon Witch's Revelation. Later. That night. As they made camp for the night, Isla sat by the fire, her thoughts swirling with the weight of the prophecy and the trials ahead. She could feel the magic of the moon goddess watching over them, a constant presence that both comforted and unsettled her. The grimoire rested in her lap, its pages open to a passage she hadn't noticed before. "The Moon Witch, a being of untold power, shall rise when the tides of fate turn. She shall wield the power to shape the destiny of all supernatural beings, but her choice shall come at the cost of her heart." Isla's breath caught in her throat as the meaning of the words sank in. The power she had begun to tap into, the power to control fate itself. It wasn't just about stopping a war or saving Asher. It was about something far deeper, something far more personal. She glanced at Asher, who was staring into the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. He was more than just a cursed alpha. He was the wolf in the prophecy, the one whose fate was intertwined with hers, and the choice she would have to make. It wasn't just about the prophecy. It was about him. Save Asher or fulfill the prophecy. Her heart twisted painfully at the thought. She had only just begun to understand her feelings for him, the bond that had grown between them over the course of their journey. But now, that bond was threatened by the very destiny that had brought them together. Could she really choose between Asher and the world? Could she bear the weight of that decision? As the fire crackled softly in the silence of the night, Isla knew that the hardest trial was yet to come, the trial of the heart. And no amount of magic could prepare her for that. The prophecy had set their course, and the forest had only begun to test them. But Isla knew that the true battle lay not in the trials themselves, but in the choices they would have to make. Choices that would determine the fate of not just the supernatural world, but their own hearts.